For those of you who do not know me, my name is Kasnahira. I am the Associate Director of Post-Secondary Programs. So my team and I focus on helping students once they're in college and making sure that they achieve whatever post-secondary goal they have. And currently I work with our upperclassmen, so our third, fourth, and sometimes fifth year. And part of my team is Olivia and Bridget. So I'll just quickly let them introduce themselves as well. So Olivia, do you want to just talk a little bit about your caseload?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Olivia Della O. I'm the post-secondary program coordinator. I specifically work with our transfer students or community college students. So if you're a high school student and you're planning to go into community college, then I may be working with you.
Hey guys, my name is Bridget Escobar. I am a college success advisor, and I specifically work with first and second year college scholars and also college success students. So if you haven't seen me, nice to meet you.
All right, great. So thank you again. So what? Just a quick breakdown of the day or of the webinar. The first 15 to 20 minutes, Bridget and Olivia are going to co-present on the MBA process, just everything, from applying to taking the test, the entrance exam to possible careers that you can pursue afterwards. Then after that, the last 30 minutes or so, we're going to have three great panelists for you all that can answer, any questions that you may have. So we strongly encourage all of you to ask questions in the chat box. As you're talking, if any questions that you want answered, anything that you've been wondering, that before you kind of commit to pursuing your MBA, then definitely this is a perfect time to ask that. I want you to ask questions. I don't want it just to be me, asking the questions that I have ready. I really want it to be for you because this is what's going to benefit you all. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Olivia and Bridget.
So like Gusset said, me and Bridget are going to give you a quick introduction to business school or Master's in Business Administration, MBA. So we'll be referring to it as an MBA. So if you haven't heard that before, now you know what that means. And all right. So we're going to start out with talking about some of the standardized tests that may be required for you to apply to an MBA program. One of the most common ones is the GMAT, the Graduate Management Admissions Test. So you can see the table that I have on the slide here. It shows you the sections that it's broken down into and the timing, right? So as you can see, the price, it's pretty pricey per test, $270 per test. You can retake it, but hopefully you don't have to. It's a very pricey test, so hopefully you take the time to study, do your research, and make sure that you know all of the components of the test. Also make note that it's also on a computer. So you won't be doing a written test. So just some things that you have to take into account as you're getting ready to explore MBA programs and the separate requirements.
Okay, so it's called the record examination. So it's priced at $12, and it's a computer and paper-based examination. So unlike the other exams, this does offer a paper-based exam. It's offered all year round, but specifically the paper-based examination is only offered about 3 times a year. And then whatever. You're allowed to retake it every 21 days and up to 5 times in a calendar year. So just so you can get an idea of how long the examination is, it's about 3 hours long and 45 minutes, and it's divided into 6 sections. As you can see here in this awesome little picture on the side right here, it's divided exactly into what sections you will be examined on. So the topics are analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. So there's 2 tasks in the analytical writing. The verbal reasoning section, there's 2 sections and 20 questions per section, as well as a quantitative reasoning topic where there's 2 sections and 20 questions per section.
Mm-hmm. And let's see. So there was a question that what's the difference between the GRE and the GMAT? If you can see, they test pretty similar things. I personally never took the GMAT, so maybe that's a question to hold on to for the panelists to see if they're if anybody's taking the GMAT or the GRE. Different type of tests. Most programs accept both, but make sure to do your research before you decide which test you're going to take. So the application process, there's different filing periods depending on the school. So make sure that you're doing your research and organizing yourself when you're doing that research for what schools that you want to apply to, there are a couple different ways that schools can actually look at your applications. So one option is that they divide it into rounds. So schools that use this option, they'll divide their filing cycles into 3 different cycles. And all those applications that are received in each particular cycle are only being compared against other applications in those cycles, right? So it's important to know whether or not your school is going to be participating in this type of round system, or if it's more on a rolling basis where you submit your application and based on the time that you apply, you can start the following term, right? So make sure that you're doing your research, that you know the dates and the deadlines, and you're staying on top of all of those. So you want to make sure that you confirm all of those policies.
All right, and this next slide is just kind of some tips that we encourage you to take when deciding on which program that you specifically want to get into. Some of the bullet points include curriculum and internship. So basically what that means is kind of just taking it, looking into the program and doing the appropriate research and seeing if the curriculum of the program meets what your needs are. So is it an online-based program? Is that something that you're gonna like and wanna be a part of? Are there practice hours? And if so, how many are you gonna have to do? Things like that to take in consideration before you actually choose the program that you're gonna get into. Also, looking at your post-MBA goal, does this program meet those goals that you have set for yourself once you get your MBA? Career services, does the program that you are applying for, do they offer the assistance to support students and get the jobs that they need and get connected with other people in that field once you graduate or even when you're in the program? And then also taking a look at concentrations and specializations that programs offer. Some of the more popular concentrations that we listed here are finance, marketing, international business, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And then also something to take into consideration is the length of the program. So we listed here that traditionally it takes about 2 years, but that can vary depending on your plan. If you're working, is it going to take you a little longer to complete those programs? It just depends on you and also the program itself.
All right. So besides the technical pieces of preparing for your application, like standardized testing, transcripts, and all that, there's different ways that you can enrich your MBA experience. And one of those ways is to look for fellowships beforehand, right? So fellowships, while you're applying or in the process of looking at MBA programs, they can really provide you with really great experiences to make you a competitive applicant, right? So one of the examples that I provided is the Reardon MBA Fellows Program through UCLA. So they provide mentorship, professional development, and really help students hone in on those skills that they're going to need to be a successful MBA candidate. Another type of fellowship that you can look at during your MBA experience is one that you can look for while you're in school, right? So while you're in your MBA program. So sometimes that can offer financial assistance. So whether it's a stipend or a scholarship, but again, they really offer those like internship experiences, hands-on experiences that you're going to need to be successful after your program. So I listed one example, which is JP Morgan Stanley MBA Fellowship. They provide a summer internship at their locations throughout North America, and this is for first-year MBA students. So some things to look into if you hadn't really heard of these things before. Just a couple examples. Okay, another way that you can start to think about enhancing your MBA experience is looking for special opportunities and partnerships, right? If you're in college right now, or if you're a high school student thinking about going into business, there are a couple campuses in California and across the nation that offer what are called 4+1 programs. So you're getting your bachelor's degree and then you do 1 year to get your MBA. So you're kind of doing it all simultaneously. I listed some schools here on the slide in California that do offer those 4+1 programs. So Chapman University, Claremont McKenna, and Cal State Fullerton. These programs tend to be very competitive. So if this is something that you are looking at or considering, make sure that you do your research and you know what all goes into that application. Right. You can also take advantage of flyout programs. So if you're looking at schools outside of the state, oftentimes they have scholarships for students to apply for to cover their travel costs. So that's something to look at as well. And a really cool special opportunity that I want to share with you guys is that Fulfillment Fund actually has a partnership with Penn State with their business school. So if you're seriously interested in Penn State or have questions about that partnership, feel free to reach out. But generally, they can offer flyouts for our students and generous financial aid packages. So again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
All right, so the next slide is a little bit about what's required on, for your transcript and your resume when you apply to your MBA. So as listed here, some but not all business schools look more closely at college, junior, and senior year grades than your overall GPA. So they're really, some programs may look at specifically how you end your college years. Many schools will look closely at your performance in quantitative courses like calculus, statistics, and microeconomics. For those of you that haven't taken any and are considering getting or going into an MBA program after you graduate, you should start considering taking those courses now and hopefully doing well in them. The typical applicant has 4 to 5 years of solid professional experience. So this kind of ties into your resume. 4 to 5 years is a lot of experience, of years, and especially since you're probably a sophomore and juniors and seniors right now. So so if you haven't started working on your experience right now, the typical applicant should have some experience already. So start working on getting experience in any field that you want to get into when you're applying to MBA. Include as much information about your accomplishments as possible, highlighting team experiences and leadership. So highlight the best qualities about yourself and what would make you just well for the program, and just make your resume shine who you are as not only as a student, but also as someone in the professional field. And then also remember to include any community service. It's good to show the community service that you've done, because it just shows you're a well-rounded individual.
Okay. Like any other application essays, the essays for an MBA program really provide an opportunity for you to explain who you are as a person versus just your grades and test scores on paper. So make sure that you're answering the questions that they're asking. I think that's a common error for a lot of students. So if it's multiple questions that they're asking, make sure to answer all parts. You may be asked to describe a failure or how do you bring diversity to the classroom, but they're definitely going to ask you like why you are pursuing an MBA at that particular school. So make sure that you know those reasons before you start writing those essays.
All right, interviews and letter of rec. So depending on the program that you're going to get into, there may be interviews prior to actually getting accepted into the program that are required. Again, that depends on your this program that you're getting into. So make sure that you do your research before that. If that's something that you feel like you're not, that you're maybe nervous about, or just feel that it could be a challenge, just take that in consideration. However, if an interview is part of the process of your application, make sure that you schedule your interview early to avoid getting any late interview slots. It's better to get it done earlier and prepare yourself well. It's super important. Make sure you're practicing and prepping questions and having people that you're close to kind of practice with you. That way that you feel more confident when you're going into those interviews. And as far as letter of recs, schools typically request a professional or academic reference. So as of right now, when you're in your undergrad programs, make sure that you're considering people that are going to be good references for you later on, whether that's someone that you work for, whether that's a professor, or someone that you're close to on campus. Just make sure that you're having those people in mind already. And another important tip is to give your recommenders details about the program that you're applying to and all the qualities that you have to offer and that's highlighted on your resume. Of course, you're going to choose someone that knows you and your work ethic very well, but you also want to give them that information so they have it with them as they're writing your recommendation. And most importantly, can't stress this enough, communicate this to your recommender early on. So I would recommend at least a 2-month notice. That's just my personal recommendation, but just make sure that you're giving them enough time to prepare and write your letter of recommendation.
All right, so financial aid, like many other grad programs, you're still going to want to submit your financial aid applications. Your package is mainly going to consist of loans, but there are opportunities for scholarships like we've discussed before. So if you know an MBA is what you want to go for, you can start now looking for those scholarships for current undergrads or seniors, anything that's going to help you fund your education, as well as assistantships for once you get on campus, right? So those are kind of like on-campus jobs as a graduate student. So taking all these things into account for your financial situation as you're looking at programs. And as always, try to save money if you can. Even the application process is expensive, taking the standardized test. So just make sure that if you can save money to help this process along more smoothly, try to do that.
And here is a quick application checklist just to kind of go over it. It's all the things that we went over in this presentation. So make sure that you take your GMAT or your GRE. Make sure that you complete your application, have all your college transcripts, a resume, your essays completed, an interview, letters of rec, and your financial aid completed.
Mm-hmm. And then the last slide, we just want to leave you all with some of the potential careers that you could pursue within MBA. So finance manager, marketing manager, business consultant, health services manager. You could go into real estate, human resources. And then I also found a really cool graphic talking about the different industries that you can get into with an MBA, different job titles, and then general years of experience, right? So this can change, varying on our markets, but this is just another helpful thing for y'all to look at and to explore. All right, well, thank you, everybody. That's the end of our presentation. And then I have some sources on the last slides. When I share out, y'all can have those as well.
Did my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and got my degree in industrial engineering. From there, I spent about 6 years working in consulting for a large firm called Accenture. And through that was able to work with a variety of different countries, or companies, not countries, across a variety of different industries. The time I spent there was really focused around digital marketing and e-commerce. And since that's pretty applicable across industries, got a chance to really get my feet wet in a variety of different settings. Through that, though, I had some experiences where I was traveling a lot, and then shifted to a time when I was working with a company that maybe wasn't as exciting as what I was hoping for, being in the consulting space. So that led me to kind of a point within my career where it was a good decision of, do I want to stay within consulting and potentially move to a place where I can be at home all the time and be in a market where there are more exciting companies? Do I want to stay in the city that I'm at, but kind of settle into an industry that isn't really near and dear to what I enjoy doing? Or do I want to do something else? And so that's what ultimately then led me to explore getting an MBA. And coming to UCLA was kind of a decision in really not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but knowing that the LA market had a ton to offer. One of the things that was touched on earlier in this presentation was understanding what the school that you're interested in is good at. And, I'm sure but really identifying that the school that you're going to aligns with what you're interested in. And so for UCLA, that was pretty heavy in tech, pretty heavy in entrepreneurship, but also open to a variety of other things like entertainment. And for me, being on the West Coast where it's close to retail and close to a lot of sporting goods companies is really important for me. So made my way west to LA, have spent the last year or just under at UCLA as part of a 2-year full-time program. And I'll be spending my summer, I was headed up to Portland to work with Nike, but I will still be working with Nike just remotely from LA. So that's really exciting. And so happy to talk about kind of the early stages of the application process, since that was just, maybe 2 years ago for me. And then kind of getting into the early stages of the MBA.
Hi, I'm Kathy Bopane. I went to UCLA Anderson. I'm a 2005 graduate, so this is supposed to be our 15-year reunion, which I am class president and helped in planning, but unfortunately we are postponed until hopefully September. So briefly, I think for me, I've always been, I would always describe myself in my career as pretty eclectic. I'm certainly not the traditional profile when it comes to an MBA, a strong MBA candidate who had a finance background or a consulting background and do your 2 years to 3 years work and then go back and get an MBA. I actually, as an immigrant, I'm Vietnamese. I'm one of 10 kids. I grew up where I was told I was awesome in science and math. So go be a doctor, because that's the aspirational career for every Asian person, or an engineer. But, you know, when I got to UCLA and I was on my way, I was a biochem major. And I was doing a lot of research and volunteer work in the hospital and realized I just didn't like it. It's just not what I'm passionate about. And so that led me to do my own research to figure out what I'm passionate about. And it was a very circuitous path, which, you know, I won't bore you guys, but ultimately I just wanted to go out and work and get a job, and I didn't know where. So I literally just picked something that I thought I enjoyed, which was fashion at the time, by the way. Do a little bit more research than I did, because fashion is definitely not a high paying industry at all. So here I am, a graduate at UCLA with a biochem degree, working in the fashion industry at a showroom in downtown LA, getting paid minimum wage. Not cool. My parents did not really like that, but ultimately I figured out what I was super passionate about and worked through different firms before realizing I needed to get a business education, because my background was all in the science. And yes, I felt that I could understand things. I just didn't have the foundational business classes, economics. So I always felt less confident in the business meetings. And so to me, that was the reason why I felt I personally needed to go get my MBA, which led me to UCLA Anderson. And of course, I'm tied to the West Coast, and continued on. So right now I'm a founder of a skincare brand called Lacer Skincare. It's formulated by myself, and it's created for skin of color. And so prior to launching this company, I was a president of Dermstore.com, which is a subsidiary of Target Corporation. So I've worked my way through different corporate jobs before deciding that it's time for me to be an entrepreneur again.
Marco Mendoza. I share a bit in common here with both Carl and Kathy, but Carl in the sense that I went to UCLA undergrad, business economics, specialization in computing. And my first career was also with Accenture.
I saw that.
Back then, I was a little bit older, but it was then known as Anderson Consulting. It was making that transition into separating from the parent, Arthur Anderson, and going public as a separate entity. And my focus there was in business process systems consulting. So we essentially implemented new software packages and the like to help companies more efficient, more productive. And the focus was on financial services companies. So primarily banks and financial services institutions. And it really was, as Carl mentioned, a really great start in a career and kind of a proving grounds for training. I think in looking at any career, you do, I think one of the things to look at is kind of their training grounds and how you're gonna build on the skill set that you and skills you're acquiring now in college. And so that really provided me a broad spectrum across working with different companies, different scenarios, different situations, and at a young age gave me that broad-based experience. Did that for 5 years, and had the aspiration to go back for my MBA as well. And I think it came a bit from both of my parents. So like Kathy, first generation born here. My parents are from the Philippines. but what got them here was their education. So I think, again, it's happy to be on this panel and share that with you all, because it's something that does open doors. And I think it's something to note as far as the networking and so on. The connections you make are really invaluable. So both my parents received their MBAs. They were both accountants. I quickly learned accounting wasn't going to be my thing. And what led me to where I am today was I interned. I'll speak a little bit about this a little later, but just in short, at Barclays Global Investors, company investment house in San Francisco. And that really led me to the career I'm in today in wealth management, Wells Fargo's private wealth management group. I started out in our Silicon Valley office, dating myself again, but at the start of the tech boom and subsequent bust. So it was a great opportunity, great start in this career, and helped to open up our office in West LA and Brentwood, which is where I reside now. And, again, helping clients, individual clients, kind of navigate through the complexities of their wealth.
So one of the questions that I would like to ask, and I'm sure a lot of our students are also wondering, is an MBA program or any graduate school in general is not exactly cheap, right? So it's a lot of money that you have to pay. Obviously, it's worth it in the end. So what I want to hear from you, and we can start with Kathy. How did you finance your MBA program? Did you receive fellowships? Was it out of pocket? Was it loans? How did you manage to pay for it?
So because I had a very circuitous career path where I worked, I actually worked for a total of 6 years prior to returning to business school. And when 2 years in working, I realized I probably should do something. So I saved a lot. I also made a lot of investments. And during that time period, there was a tech boom, but there was also a huge housing boom, of which some of my investments did pretty well. So I self-funded or paid for my own way for, my MBA program. The other thing that I did, which I don't think the school likes, but after the first 2 quarters at UCLA Anderson, I was there at 03, 04, and that was the year that after the first quarter, the school increased tuition by 25% every quarter thereafter. So every quarter you were attending business school, it got much more expensive than what you had signed up for. So because of that, in my second year, after the first quarter, I just decided to load up on classes and graduated 2 quarters early. So I could save 2 quarters of financing my education. Carl, you're laughing, but you kind of have to be creative and realize that your course load, you're capable of handling. They say 12 units, it's nothing. Like you can do 4 classes, 16 units, and work full time, and that's perfectly fine. Also, my summer internship, I actually did investment banking, which taught me that you can pretty work 100-hour week and you're fine.
Sleep is overrated, right?
It is totally overrated, but if anything, that teaches you that you can, if you put your mind to it, you can get it done. It's just a matter of just prioritizing time management and focus.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Marco, same question.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think to Kathy's point, you definitely need to get creative. I think one thing in evaluating the decision is the switching cost, right? You look at kind of your current situation, your career, what you're getting paid, et cetera. And of course, it matters. And I think for me, I had 5 years of prior work experience. So with this being an objective, I was saving. So there was certain personal savings. I think secondly was also the loans. So I did take out some student loans at a very attractive rate, which have all since been paid off, which is great. But and then the last piece, which I didn't discover until I was there in my first year, was some of the opportunities on campus. And for me, which was very rewarding, was my second year of business school. I served as a graduate student instructor for the undergraduate business school, which, as you may know, Berkeley is one of the tops for the undergrad business program. So it was a great opportunity for me to share knowledge and apply and have fun with the undergrads and get paid. So, I mean, it helped, I think, pay for, if I recall, all of my second year, which was an added bonus. So I think getting creative in that fashion, kind of looking at different avenues, and there's a lot of resources out there too, so you can tap into, and so that's how I did it.
Great, congratulations on paying all your loans. I know it's definitely a struggle. And last but not least, Carl, this question I think is very important. So let's get your take on it as well. How are you currently financing your MBA program?
Yeah, I'm right in the throes of it. So I think Kathy hit it on the head when she talked about having a chance to work before the program. I think one of the things that is maybe not unique, but different about an MBA than potentially some other graduate programs is you'll pretty much always be working for 3 to 6 or maybe more years before you get into the program. And so you have that time to actually earn some money to set aside. And so that was definitely something that I had done as well. A couple of the other things that now that I'm in the program that I'm doing in addition to taking out some loans is looking at those TA-ships for this next year. On top of paying money, they also can reduce tuition. And so they're a really good setup for already being on campus and being able to plug into some of those professors that are there. So I think the other, both Marco and Kathy kind of hit it pretty well, but just emphasizing that, as you are beginning to prep yourself for an MBA, that setting some of that money aside is really important and can really go a long ways to cover expenses.
If I can just echo Carl's comment on the work experience, I think is invaluable too. I think the average they say is 4 to 5 years. Maybe it's longer now, but I think that one, it gives you that broader perspective, and there's a lot of team projects and things that you get into working with your fellow colleagues, and by having that work experience does give you that added perspective. I did see a couple folks, students that, if I remember, there were a couple that had maybe 2 years experience. I think looking back, it probably wasn't as a rewarding experience. And they could probably attest to that too, just because they jumped right into it and it was something, I think you get a little bit more out of it with a little more work experience beforehand. So I just wanted to echo Carl's comments.
Oh, great. And that was actually my next question. How important, no, but that's great. You got to jump on it. So that was great. How important did you feel that it was to get that work experience? So a lot of times we have or students have a misconception of, I have to get my degree or my grad school degree right out of undergrad, just let's get it over with. But clearly, at least specifically for the MBA, that's not really an advantage in this case. So Marco, you already attested to it a bit, but let's go to Kathy. How important was it for you to have that experience, that work experience, before you delved into your MBA program?
Extremely important. With 6 years under my belt at a variety of different companies, from startups as well as larger corporation, I think the breadth of experience you get in terms of working in teams, to being exposed to just the budget requirements, to just general business requirements, and just all of that will help you really understand case studies that you'll come across in the classroom. The other thing too is, I think, the ability to truly know yourself and well enough such that you can leverage the time in business school to figure out your next career path, right? Because sometimes it's really not a straight line. And when you go into a great MBA program, it's an opportunity to switch careers. So you can go from being a lawyer to just completely going into entertainment. So with that opportunity, having some formative years working truly helps you figure out yourself and really plan for your next path. And recruiters now is another thing. I think a criteria to decide whether, you know, getting an MBA is worth it is really not only just the first job you get once you graduate. It's also the connections you build. And I definitely feel that when you have, you know, a strong work experience, you're able to connect more with your classmates and really appreciate their experience. But also with recruiting, they really can see and can tell that you have the maturity, professionalism, and, you know, the capacity to stretch yourself should they hire you.
Great, thank you for that. So, Cara, I know before I continue, students, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and add them on the chat box. So I'll continue to ask questions, but we definitely want to answer any specific questions that you all have. So I'll ask another question, and then I'll go ahead and address. I see Christian has a question, so I'll go ahead and address it in a bit. Cara, I know a student talked a little bit about the GMAT, and you mentioned that you would answer some of those questions. So what was your preparation in studying for the GMAT and going into it? It's obviously, you know, it's a difficult exam and it can take a toll on you. And, you know, so what was that process? How long did you study beforehand? Did you take a class? Did you just order the book online? What was that process for you?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, because it is really a process. So I started out with ordering one of the books in interactive like software platforms that allow you to get on and do some practice tests on your own computer in the exact same way that what it would be if you were going in and taking the test. I think it might have been like Princeton Review or something like that. But that was incredibly helpful. And I remember reading at the beginning of their book that the typical MBA student spends between 80 and 120 hours preparing for the exam or preparing for the test. And so I think that was a good, just a good bar to set, and just understanding that there's a lot of time to prep and get ready for this exam or this test. And so I had spent about a month and a half working through the material there, taking a couple of practice tests, and then went in a little bit before I thought I was fully ready and took the test. And that really gave me a good feel, even though the score wasn't what I was ultimately looking for. But it gave me a good feel for what I did poorly on and what I needed to focus on, and then what I was actually doing well at. So I learned coming out of that there's a couple different portions of that test. One is your quantitative, which is like your math and kind of your, algebra and that sort of stuff. And then there's your qualitative, which is recognizing like arguments and sentence structure and that sort of stuff. So even as an engineer, my quantitative was terrible. So I knew to spend a ton of time on that, and actually just bought a separate book and just spent another month or so working through that. And then was able to, up my score by, I think it was like 80 points just from focusing on the area that previously I had not done so well. So even in talking with some of the other classmates that I have, I think the average student will end up taking it 2 or 3 times. It's pretty rare that I hear that somebody takes it one time and is just straight done. I think a lot of people spend quite a bit of time working through it in whatever way that works well for them. But also, just because you don't score what you want on the first time, realizing that you can go again. But also, it was talked about earlier in the presentation, it does cost money to do it. And so realizing that, you got to put in the time to make sure that you're not just going and taking it, hoping for a better score.
Great, thank you for that. So one of the questions that a student has, well, he has a few, but one of the ones that I do want to focus on is he talks about if any of you had mentors prior to pursuing the MBA, or if you met any mentors in this case that helped you really achieve success, whether it be in your MBA program or in your career. So we can start with Marco. Would you mind answering that question?
Yeah, I think that's important. I think I did in my career at Anderson or Accenture. There were a couple leaders there that, you know, did have a close relationship with in that regard as mentors. So they helped, and they helped write the letters of recommendation. So that helped. I think related to this, I did want to mention one of the things I did in the schools that I applied to. I did an outreach, looked at the alumni or current students or alumni, because there were certain databases that you could access, and simply cold called them and just reached out and said, hey, I'm looking to apply. They might have been related. They were in consulting too. And, you know, I connected with a number of them in that regard. And one of which I went up to, and I think this certainly helped in my application process, but met with a few of them, and one turned into an interview. So that, I think with some of the campuses, they do allow personal on-campus interviews as part of your application process. I think with Haas, it was optional. If it's optional, do it. I would say go do it, because I think whatever you could separate yourself as an applicant to make it personal, reach out, and plus it gives you a better feel. I mean, this is a, you know, literally life-changing event for you. And if you're going to spend the time, the money, make sure it's the right school, the right environment. So, you know, go out and visit with the schools, meet with as many of the current students or alumni as you can. And that's what I did. And I think it really helped shape my decision in going to Haas.
Kathy, we have a question from a student who wants to know if you can name a person who has had a tremendous impact on you as a leader. How did you feel that this person impacted your life?
Oh, wow. Great question. So there's one who's actually having perhaps the hardest time in her career right now. She's currently the presidency of Princess Cruises. So prior to business school, I worked in the strategy department at Princess Cruises. So I was in charge of their website and their e-commerce and distribution strategy, which at that time, the internet was not really the internet yet. Travel was just starting to sell through on the internet with Expedia as a startup, but certainly cruise products was not. So Jan went to business school, and she was certainly my mentor. And what I think, to answer the prior question too, was I think for me, just being able to share and communicate with those who you are close with, your colleagues, but also your boss or mentors at work, your intention that you like or you're thinking about going to business school is important, because it sets the tone for the relationship that you can have with them. And it could be much, you know, some people get afraid of sharing advice with you because they don't want to tell you what to do. But when you start to set that intention out there and ask for advice, you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help you. So anyway, my mentor, Jan, she's certainly someone that I had looked up to just because of just her tenacity, her ability to just multitask and really lead a large organization on a direction that was completely new. And at that time, completely unfavorable in the corporate, in the company, because we were essentially migrating towards e-commerce, newer distribution, which meant a whole bunch of our employee base could potentially felt threatened. And so how you manage and communicate that was pretty important. And that's when I really learned about the importance of having an MBA, but also how you can communicate your ideas and thoughts, and the difference that you need to have when you're speaking with a big group in a conference versus, you know, a one-on-one meeting versus a small, much more intimate 10-person meeting. The style, the approach you should have should vary. And so I just observed that, and I realized that there is truly, you know, charisma that some people have, but there's also a science and an art mixed to it. And if you can just practice that more, you might not be perfect, but you're certainly better off than not practicing.
Carl, question for you. So letters of recommendation are extremely important during an application process. And sometimes it's, you know, you're already in your professional career. So how did you, having that experience, how did you choose who you wanted your recommenders to be, and ultimately who did you end up deciding on?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of helpful. You are a little limited. Most schools will give you some direction around what they would like. The first being somebody that has been a manager or a boss. And so that was pretty easy for me. I had worked under a boss that I had a really good relationship for a couple of years. And it was somebody that I had already began talking with about potentially leaving Accenture to go and pursue my MBA. And so he kind of joked around with me that he was going to write me a terrible review because he didn't want me to leave. But ultimately, it was somebody that was really, really good. I think kind of in line with what Kathy was just saying about you have that relationship with somebody that you trust, and it's more than just like a transactional work relationship, but there's a lot there. And so that was really kind of the easy one. And then from there, it was figuring out kind of who the one other person, because typically you'll be asked to provide two. And so I picked one of my clients that I had a really good relationship with, and somebody that, again, I had worked with for a while. I think some of the things that you'll want to think about when you ask for letters of recommendation are the duration of time that you've known this person. I think that's big, so that they not only have seen like a quick snapshot of the work that you've done, but actually have been able to see the work you've done over time.
Your growth.
Had a number of things to draw on. So I think that was a big thing. And then the other thing was just the client that I worked for not only was a pretty close relationship, but was pretty senior. And so having somebody that can give an executive level overview of the work you've done, not just, kind of down in the weeds of, Carl's done this, this, and this, but it was like, here's how he's impacted our business overall. It was really important. So I think those two things really kind of came into play when figuring out who to ask. And one other thing I would add is, again, that, spending some time in the workforce before moving into an MBA program is really key here, is that you have that time to build those relationships and build that trust that you then have those people to tap into. And that's really important.
Great, thank you, Carl. So we have a question from one of our students. I'll send this over to Marco. So Marco, what would you say was the biggest sacrifice that you had to make while obtaining your MBA?
Oh, wow. Well, clearly that was with my then girlfriend and now wife. So I think what's funny about, and any of the, Carl could probably attest to this, but dive into the consulting arena. My now wife was also a consultant, so we were both traveling on various projects. So I think we actually only saw each other on every other weekend. And so when you compress that together, maybe, during our period while we were dating, it was maybe 3 or 4 years or something. But, you compress it, it was only 2 because we only saw each other every other weekend. Well, the funny thing was my last project in Anderson, I was in the Midwest. I was in Minneapolis, and she was in LA. And then so when I got accepted to Haas, it was actually a better situation for us because we were both on the same time zone. And it was a closer flight. It was only an hour. So I think for me personally, it was that was a personal sacrifice. Was just more your family, your loved ones. If I think there were a number of folks, I'm sure Kathy Carl can attest to, that were in that same boat. And we actually did have we had 2 married couples that were in our cohorts. So that made things really interesting. But I think, for me, that was one of the sacrifices. But I think what helped in that regard was my wife also had obtained her MBA, so she kind of knew what I was going through. So it was, it was like she got to go back to business school again. So, but yeah, that's, I think that, and then I think the other thing is just the managing your time. I think to the point of obviously the workload, but then once you get accustomed to that, it's just really, again, like a kid in a candy store. You want to kind of just see what else is out there, and you kind of stretch thin. But I think that's encouraged because that is your time. I mean, it's a short 2 years goes like that, in a nanosecond, and you want to take advantage of every minute. And I think just exploring those opportunities. And I think lastly, I'll just end with, on that note, I mean, it's not maybe related to the question, but just I think someone else mentioned it, the connections and the relationships have just been invaluable. I mean, to this day, I've probably 15 of my closest friends that we get together every year, and we've done it for the last 20 years. I mean, I just celebrated our 20th anniversary. Kathy, you're doing your 15th. I mean, it's we get together. It started out with fantasy football, actually. So we all had our fantasy football league, and that kind of kept us all together. And then it branched out to everyone's spouses and kids and all that. So it's I think those connections are just invaluable.
Great, thank you. Question for Kathy. So you've all attested that work experience is extremely important before pursuing your MBA. So with that being said, Kathy, what key qualities or experiences are important to gain during that time when you're working before you pursue your MBA?
Great question. I from my perspective, I think when you think about the role and the objective of an MBA program, they're really looking for candidates who they feel have the potential for growth in their lives, professional career, because ultimately that's a testament to the success of the program itself. So with that, the schools, if you're thinking about, what should I do in order to look good on the application, it's really about getting, experiences in projects that impact the business, that demonstrates that you truly understand some of the larger mechanics that business or that industry is involved in. And you can go into depth about that and truly understand what you've done, but also what your departments have done as well. So it's not just superficial, but a much demonstrated deeper understanding of that. It's also the ability to, identify problems and, learning how to be resourceful to solve for that. So, they're not looking for someone who says, oh, I was given a task and I performed it, as much as, hey, we saw that there was some issues, we've investigated, we've truly identified what the issues are, and therefore we worked on defining a solution that truly helped change the trajectory of your business unit or your team or whatever it is. That is really, the core of what makes an MBA graduate, the probability of that person being more successful later on in life is that dynamic thinking and problem solving. So I think when you start to think about, what it is, like, you look for those opportunities, you work with your boss to say, what is it that we can identify, solve, help improve productivity, help whatever it is, and going above and beyond just the task at hand, I think would be critical.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. We probably have time for one more question, and then maybe I'll give each of you a last word. So let's say, Carl, what helped you determine what specific field you wanted to pursue in business?
Oh man, I think it's a number of things. It's kind of funny. Like when I wrote my essays for coming to UCLA Anderson, I was pretty dead set on going into entrepreneurship. And then I had some time this past summer to spend away from work before I moved out to LA, and didn't spend any time working on the venture that I had kind of outlined and thinking about, and realized that entrepreneurship might not be for me right now. And so then came into the MBA, really kind of questioning, well, what the heck am I going to do? And so I don't think there's one specific silver bullet process that is your one way of figuring out what you want to do. I will say that once I got here, similar to what Marco talked about, it's kind of like a kid in a candy store where there's a ton of different stuff that you can explore and get your feet wet in. One of the things I really have enjoyed about the MBA experience is that it's a safe space to experiment with a number of different industries and different things that when you're working, you just don't have that time to do. So I got the chance to explore some work within like the sports industry. So, you know, teams and leagues and that kind of stuff, see if that was for me, which ultimately it wasn't. To see if big tech was for me. So looked into, you know, potentially working with like Amazon or Google. And that really wasn't for me. But I think having the chance to get your feet wet, to interact with people from those companies, to talk with students that have, you know, either interned there or alumni that have worked on those things, that is all super helpful. And then I know at least at Anderson, there's some formal processes that the Career Center has you walk through that is also really helpful in just kind of exploring the things that you're interested in. And so maybe that's a quick plug, is just as you are looking at different programs, kind of seeing what things beyond the classroom that's available. So at Anderson, one of the big things is the Career Center. And so that's super helpful in being able to narrow down the area of interest.
Great, thanks, Carl. So last question, and it'll be for all of you, so you'll have an opportunity. Will the student specifically ask, what advice would you give your undergrad freshman selves? So let's kind of go with that, but at the same time, what advice would you have for our students in general that at this point are interested in pursuing an MBA? So we'll start with Marco.
Wow. Okay. What would I advise myself as undergrad? That's a good one. You know, I think at that point I really wasn't thinking about business school, but I think it was, you know, the relationships, the kind of discovering your passion, I guess is how I'd leave it with. You know, discovering what really puts the fire in your belly, what gets you excited, and have no fear, you know, go out, explore different avenues, be curious. I think, you know, those are, I think just broadly speaking, I'd mention as an undergrad, I think, you know, I would advise. And then I think just kind of closing out and kind of looking at a few different aspects. I kind of jotted a number of things down, but I think when you're looking at, especially when it comes to the MBA program, you know, tap into that network, you know, look at the connections, you know, you can look at the databases and kind of see what career connection, you know, like Carl mentioned, if there's certain careers you're interested in, it's such a great way to just send an email, lob a call in, and folks are happy to speak to people looking to, you know, pursue their career, pursue their MBA. So I think, you know, tap into those resources, you know, and then once you get there, you know, again, just have no fear, be curious, you know. I think, you know, look around, see what's behind door number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, and it just gives you a broader perspective. And I you know, my time there was so precious. I really, you know, look back at it like it was yesterday, but, you know, it was 20 years ago. But it was such a concentrated time, and so much. It's like drinking water out of a fire hydrant. And it was such an exciting time. And I think, you know, it doesn't come without costs, right? I mean, there's trading costs or switching costs, as I mentioned earlier. Looking into your career, you know, it may not pan out where you are, and you kind of want to look at these other opportunities. I remember some of my classmates, they had the opportunity, you know, with their current employer, they provided a stipend or, you know, some opportunity to pay for business school. So that's another way. I think you were talking about financing it, is maybe whether it's through a larger organization or smaller one, you never know. I mean, just to ask that question. And, I think a lot of companies do like to do that because it gives them opportunity for their employees to then train and then come back, in hopes of coming back. So that's another way that could be looked at to finance things. And the other thing too, I just thought of, I've gotten this question before, is, there's different programs. There's obviously, we've been all participants of the full-time MBA program, but there's also the evening MBA. There's the corporate program. So there's different ways you can achieve it. I think we're all fortunate to be able to be fully immersed and participate in a full-time MBA program, which is what I'd highly recommend if you can do it. But, I don't know about you guys, but I was in our cohorts, we were able to interface with some of the evening program MBA students, and they just might be able to go full time because they have families, they have they got to work, etc. But if you can go full time, I definitely recommend it. Gives you more of that time to immerse yourself, and like Carl mentioned, tap into those resources, and the career centers for phenomenal. So I just leave with it as an avenue to just discover your passion.
Great, thank you, Marco. Kathy, really quick, same question. What advice would you have for either your freshman self or for our students in general?
I'll share a personal story. So after the first quarter of the MBA program, I remember vividly just thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this is like the most fun and rewarding experience I've ever had in my entire life. If someone told me that this is how business graduate school is going to be this exhilarating, I would have gone sooner, and I would not have second guessed the decision to, make the sacrifices that you need to make, both financially as well as time, to go to the MBA program. So it's just, the full-time program just pushes you with a lot of like-minded classmates who have work experience, some money, with the drive to not only propel yourself professionally, but to improve yourself constantly. And so you have this momentum and energy that you just thrive on. And that just is such a great environment to be in when you're, 26 to 30. I don't, with the difference in age groups, but it was just a fun experience. And I just don't want people to think like an MBA is just like all serious. Like, you're serious with your career. You have to be strategic about it, but it's also 110% fun at the same time. And, that's how you're building the relationships and the connections with your classmates that last a lifetime. I mean, you're studying as much as you're probably at the bar. So it's the whole part. So that's the honest truth to it.
Thank you for sharing that, Kathy. Last but not least, Carl, same question.
The honest truth. So I completely echo what both Marco and Kathy have said. The one thing I would probably just kind of quickly leave with is that in my experience, that it's taken some effort to kind of take the path less traveled. And I think the MBA is the path less traveled. And so being willing to not be scared to do things that other people aren't going to do. So early on in the career, whether it is taking a project that other people might not want to take, or being willing to put in some extra time to polish some things that other people might not think that needs to get polished. It is kind of that, doing something a little different, putting in the extra effort, and definitely just like making the choice to go and get an MBA is kind of that path, like, typically less traveled. It's definitely an amazing path to take, but you're going to be, 2, 3, 4 years into your career and be surrounded by a lot of people that like what they do and might not want to leave what they're doing to go and get their MBA. So that just not be scared to take that path less traveled, and just kind of go for it. So that's what I think, just getting used to that, I think is what would set you up well.